Hello and welcome to this video all about good habits that you can get into that will really help you with your EPP quilts and also other types of quilting and hand sewing as well. Now, I'm not about quick, fast fixes or churning out quilts. I really enjoy the slow nature of hand sewing. But there are little changes that we can make that can really shave off little bits of time here and there. And over the course of a huge EPP quilt, which might involve thousands of individual pieces, making those little changes and just shaving off small amounts of time here and there can make a really big difference. My aim with this video is to show you how all of these little habits can really work together and add up to help you progress to that end goal of a completed EPP quilt in a bit of a faster time. Of course, it's going to still take a long time. Making an EPP quilt is an investment. But there's nothing more frustrating than sitting down, ready to do a bit of relaxing hand sewing, to find that there are certain things that are not in place and certain things that are in your way that are going to slow you down. So I really hope that these habits that I'm going to share with you today will really be helpful in getting you to your end goal in a little bit of a shorter time. I'd like to thank Serious Readers for sponsoring this video today, and I will tell you more about them and their wonderful products in a short while. So I think one of the most important things when it comes to sitting down and doing some hand sewing and working on an EPP quilt is being able to see what you're doing. And I've been lucky all of my life. My eyesight has been really good until just before Christmas, when I started to really struggle to be able to thread a needle. So I got myself a pair of reading glasses, and I'm really pleased that they've made a really big difference. So if you are starting to just struggle a little bit to see how to thread your needle, then do get your eyes tested. It's made a big difference for me. So getting into the habit now of wearing those glasses is a bit of a challenge for me, because I've spent all of this time without glasses on, but I'm really trying hard to get into the habit of picking up those glasses and putting them on, because they make a big difference. Another good habit when it comes to threading a needle is to get into the habit of picking up a needle threader. Now, you might be like me in that you might have an array of needle threaders in your sewing kit and don't really reach for them. I know I've never had a problem until recently, so I've never needed a needle threader. But now that I am struggling a little bit more to see, I am using a needle threader all the time now. I have a few different ones that I really like. For milliner's needles, I do recommend this Clover quilt. I think it's called a Quilters needle threader. And this one is really good for the fine needles. There are some other ones that you can get for embroidery needles, but the best needle threader that I can recommend, and the one that I'm totally in the habit of using now, is the Clover desk needle threader. Now, just having this out on the desk near where I work is so useful, and it's a really great habit to get into because it speeds you up. And even if you can see to thread a needle, this needle threader is so quick and easy to use that it does make that little bit of difference. It's really simple to use. You just pop your needle in the top and then put your thread through that gap, press the button, and then it threads your needle, and it does thread the really fine needles. So I do really recommend getting into the habit of using a needle threader, whichever one suits you, but this is my needle threader of choice. Now, the next really good habit to get into is pre-threading your needles before you sit down for a sewing session. And having the needle threader makes that really easy. So something that I like to do is just get about 8 to 10 needles out and then thread them up. If I'm at home, I tend to store them in a Hexagon needle book that is a free pattern, and I have a video tutorial on YouTube about that. I'll leave links to those below, and it's a really nice project. So I tend to use those to store my pre-threaded up needles, and then they're all ready to go, and I can have a nice long stitching session without having to worry about stopping and threading up needles. So that is a really good habit to get into. If I'm sewing out and about, I thread up my needles and store them in the Clover dome needle case, and this is a brilliant gadget because it stores your threaded needles and it winds the thread around inside. Nothing gets tangled up, and everything's safe and secure and they're not going to come unthreaded. So it stores 10 needles and I really recommend this. So getting into the habit of pre-threading your needles will definitely save you some time and some frustration. Another thing that is really important when it comes to seeing what you're doing is lighting. Having adequate lighting is so important and crucial to hand stitching. So this brings me on nicely to talk about today's sponsor, which is the lovely company Serious Readers. So Serious Readers make a wonderful range of Serious lights, and this is my high definition model, and it is a floor standing light and I use it all the time for my sewing. I've been using this light for over a year now and I don't know how I would stitch without it. It has made such a difference. The Serious range of lights uses something called daylight wavelength technology, and what this means is that the light that it gives off is as close to daylight as is possible, and this really makes a difference and allows me to see what I'm doing really clearly. The light is fully adjustable. You can tilt it, you can position it wherever you would like it to be, you can focus the beam of light to be concentrated on what you're working on or to be wider and covering more of your table, and you can brighten and dim the light as well. Serious lights are hand built in the UK and they come with a 5-year warranty, and I think that is fantastic. You know, you're getting something that's really high quality and you've got that peace of mind as well. I find stitching with this light makes it really comfortable on the eyes. I'm not straining my eyes to see, and you know, we use fine needles and really fine thread in EPP, so having good lighting is so important. I will leave a link in the description box with more information on the Serious lights range, and if you were to decide to purchase the high definition model, which is the one I have here, and you use the offer code SR307, you will get £100 off the cost of the light, and there is also free international shipping as well. So a huge thank you to Serious Readers for sponsoring today's video. So the next really good habit to get into is keeping notes on your projects, and this good habit stretches across all crafts, knitting, crochet, anything like that, because if you're anything like me, you think you're going to remember all the details for the project, but when you've set it aside for a while and you want to come back to it, you realise you don't know what needle size you were using, or hook size, or what thread you were using, or what size the hexagons were. So to make life easier, keep some notes. Now, I have this lovely notebook that my mum gave to me recently, and isn't it just perfect for keeping project notes? It has lovely paper as well. So I like just keeping some simple notes, and your notes don't have to be extensive. For example, for my Happy Memories Quilt As You Go quilt, I've just noted down when I started it, the threads that I'm using, the needles that I'm using, my ideas for fabrics, ones that I want to include, the size of the hexagons that I'm using, so the larger hexagon for the backing and the smaller one for the centre, and the wadding that I'm using. So it's really just as simple as that. It doesn't have to be anything complex. I know some people really enjoy tracking their progress and writing down how many shapes they need to baste and ticking them off like that. I don't work like that at all. I just keep some really simple notes so I know that when I'm going back to a project, exactly what I need, and it just speeds things up a little bit and stops any frustration. And I've created a free printable project notes sheet, and I'm going to send it out to everybody on my email list and everybody over on Patreon as well. So if you'd like to receive that, maybe you have a planner with rings in and you'd like to print it off and put it in, or you have a folder or something like that. So if you'd like to receive this free printable, then you can sign up to my email newsletter, and I will be sending that out at the end of this month. So I will leave a link to that in the description box below. Okay, next we're going to talk about good habits for basting your shapes. Now, I'm a glue baster, so I don't have any good habits to share about thread basting because it isn't something that I ever do. But if you do have some good habits about that, then please leave them in the comments, because I know many of you enjoy reading the comments just as much as I do, and there's often so many helpful tips in there, so please share them below. But I use glue, and if you live in a hot climate, which I don't, but it does get warmer in the summer, a really good habit to get into, and this is going to sound strange, but a good habit to get into with your glue is to keep it in the fridge. If you keep your glue refills in the fridge and your glue pens, you'll find that they don't get gunky and gloopy and they don't melt in the hot weather, which is something that can really happen in the summer. So it's a bit of a strange habit to keep your glue in the fridge, but it honestly works. This will save you time, but it will also save you money as well, because you'll use less glue because it is more solid and it will just work better. So that is a really good habit to get into. Now, when it comes to basting shapes, we have a lot of them to do for EPP. So I never used to like cutting fabric and basting shapes, but if you're going to make an EPP quilt, you really do have to embrace that. But there are some little things that we can do to really shave off a bit of time here and there. So one thing I like to do is baste my shapes en masse. I like to have a set amount of time, an hour or 2 hours set aside where I'm just going to baste my shapes. Now, if I do that, it means that I can then pick up and put down the sewing much more easily, and I'll come on to that in just a few moments. But let me explain about how we can baste shapes and save some time. So basting en masse is a great way to get into the flow, get into the rhythm, and baste quite a lot of shapes all in one go. The next thing to do, if you're not using scrap fabrics and if you're not doing fussy cutting, is to think about how you cut your fabric. What I like to do is cut my fabric into strips. Now, I'm really careful to make sure that the strips that I cut allow for the seam allowance on the top and bottom of my shape. So I'll position my shape onto my fabric and I'll use my ruler and gauge how wide I need to cut my strips, and then I'll typically cut 2 or 3 strips at a time. Then what I will do is layer them up really neatly so they are exactly on top of each other, and then I'll take my paper shape and I will tack it to the strip, leaving enough space between the shapes to allow for the seam allowance on either side. Then I like to use my rotating mat because it just makes this nice and quick and easy, and I use a rotary cutter and a ruler and I cut between them. But you'll notice I'm cutting 3 at a time, so it does really speed this process up quite a bit. Then when I've done that, I baste all of the paper shapes that I'd tacked in place, and then I just put the rest of my paper shapes onto the other pieces of fabric that I've cut and baste them. Just like that, and it really does speed the process up. One at a time is going to take forever. Now, you know me, I'm not ever in a rush for doing these projects. I really enjoy taking my time, so I do work slowly when I'm doing this, but knowing that I am just shaving that little bit of time off here and there because I am working with a few shapes at a time, it does make a difference, and you will find after a session of an hour or so that you do have quite a lot of shapes basted and ready to go. And linked to this, a really good habit to be in is to be able to assess your time and match it to the task that you need to do appropriately. So if you have a large amount of time, spending it on a big basting session if you don't have any shapes already basted is a great way to spend that time. And then that means that when you have small pockets of time, 5 minutes or 10 minutes here and there, your shapes are ready and you can just quickly pick them up, do a few stitches and put them down again if you need to. So that big basting session feeds into quick stitching sessions, and that is a really good habit to be in. Now, it is hard to get into the habit of picking your sewing up and putting it down, picking it up and putting it down throughout the day when you have small pockets of time, but you will find that it will make a really big difference. So it is a really great habit to get into. If you only have 5 minutes here or there, you can probably stitch 2 or 3 shapes together in each session, and by the end of the day you might have 8 or 10 shapes stitched together that you wouldn't have had before, and all of that will add up over time, and you'll find that you will make progress on your quilt even faster. So the basting of the shapes, the preparing of your needles in advance, those things allow you to be able to pick up and put down your EPP as you go through the day. So that's why they are really good habits to have, and that's why I said that all these little habits will feed into each other and add up to progress on your quilt. Now, I've mentioned these habits before on the channel, but two really important habits to get into for your actual stitching is to do that locking stitch at every junction, so that if a thread was to snap or you did need to undo something, the whole lot isn't going to unravel. So doing that is really important and makes a huge difference. If you take anything away from today's video, that would be my number one good habit to get into, is just doing that little locking knot at every junction. But the other good habit that I think is really useful and saves you time and frustration is continuous stitching. I see a lot of people just stitching one seam, fastening off, cutting the thread and starting again. And while that might work for them, and that's absolutely fine, I know that I would find that really frustrating, and I much prefer using the continuous stitching method. So it's exactly where it says. You stitch along one seam and you carry on and join the next shape along by not cutting your thread, just carrying on, but doing that locking knot. And then you look where you're going to go next, and you can carry the thread to the next part. You can tack it in the seam allowance if you wish, or you can just carefully place it along the back. And if you're not travelling huge distances on the back, this technique works really well. I wouldn't use it for travelling a few inches at a time. I would only use it for travelling 1 to 2 inches. Of course, there are times when you do need to fasten off and start somewhere else. But as a general rule, I try to stitch continuously as much as I can, and I just find that gets me better in the flow. It makes it more enjoyable for me because I don't enjoy starting and stopping. Another good habit to be in if you're making a big quilt is to join the blocks as you go. It's really tempting to just make all the individual blocks because they're nice and they're easy and they're portable and you're not fighting with them to get all of the pieces together. But once you've done them all, you'll have a mountain of blocks and you'll feel like you've got such an uphill climb to do to get to the big finish of the quilt at the end. So if you can get into the habit of maybe doing enough blocks for one row, and I'm going to use the Lucy Boston patchwork of the crosses as an example, it's really tempting to just make the cross blocks and then leave all the in-between parts until the end, but I just know that if I worked in that way, I don't think I'd ever get the quilt done. So make a few blocks, maybe enough for a row, and then join them together. Then make the next set of blocks and join them together, and join those 2 rows together. And very soon you will feel like you're making progress on your quilt because you can see it growing, and that will motivate you to keep going. So I really think that it will save you time, but it will also give you some motivation. So that is a good habit to be in. And another good habit for this is to take the papers out as you go. You don't need to leave all of the papers in right until the end, unless you want to, and some people do prefer that because it gives the whole piece structure. But I find that just leaving the papers in of the shapes that you're joining to is enough. It gives it enough structure to join the next set of shapes together, the next block, and this will reduce the weight of your quilt, particularly as it gets larger, and it will make it easier to manoeuvre it and to work on it, and you'll be less tired. So I do recommend getting into the habit of removing the shapes as you go, because spending a few hours at the end of the project removing the papers can be quite daunting, and I just know that I prefer to do it as I go along, but everybody feels different about this. So let me know which you prefer in the comments below. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's video and that you liked hearing about these good habits that really help to get you to your end goal. I really think that all these little habits work together to make the process more enjoyable, less frustrating, and will get us to a finished quilt faster, although Speed is never our aim, is it, with EPP quilts? We enjoy that process, but I think these little things make the process more enjoyable as well, because we don't want any frustration when it comes to making our quilts. We really want to enjoy it, don't we? So I hope that you found this video useful. I have some more ideas for tips about saving money and things like that when you're working with a budget for EPP, and if that's something that you're interested in, please let me know and I will endeavour to bring that video to you soon as well. But until then, a huge thank you for watching. A massive thank you to everyone who is supporting me and this channel through Patreon. It really, really means so much to me. Thank you to everyone who has been supporting me through the super thanks button as well. I'm so grateful for all of you, and take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.